So then, if you awaken from this illusion,
persistence of vision.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Persistence of Vision podcast.
Hello, folks.
Hello, folks.
Who are you?
I am LBDO.
I am Lance Peaver Myers. This is the Persistence of Vision podcast. If you want to check out our website, it is POV-Publishing.com. There you can find comics by world-class artists. You can read poetry. You can see the links to all our past podcasts. You can also find links to my novel, Why So Much, by Lance Myers. You can also find a link to go buy LB's newly released novel, The Goddamn Fool, which we had our release party last night, and it was fantastic.
Yes, if you missed that party, I will be pitying you for the rest of your mortal days.
But you can buy a copy of the book on Amazon. So go check it out. It is fantastic. While you're there, pick up a copy of mine. And you can also pick up a copy of a book called Suspect Red by Laura Elliott. We have Laura today.
Yes, we do, and we're very delighted to have her. Welcome aboard, Laura.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm really sorry I missed the party last night.
Well, we are so sorry that you couldn't make it.
That
we
would have been great.
understand that it would have involved a few thousand miles of travel.
It would have.
Well, that's no excuse.
Where are you calling from, Laura?
From Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C.
Okay, fantastic. Well, your book was really, really fun and really interesting and very educational as well. Suspect Red is its name. Tell us a little bit about it. Tell the readers, give us your summation without any spoilers.
Without any spoilers, okay. This is my 8th, I think, historical fiction for young adults. I was a journalist for 20 years in D.C., writing primarily about women's issues and mental health and health issues and some performing arts. When I took a sidestep, I call myself an accidental novelist. I took a sidestep to do a book that was inspired by my dad's experiences in World War II as a B-24 bomber pilot. Oh, and wow. It was an amazing journey, that novel. I mean, I have to tell you, if you can't write a good World War II book, you have no business being a writer, because it's just fact. You know, if you just absorb the anecdotes and do the reading, I mean, there's just so many moving life or death kind of choices that people made, and they truly were the greatest generation. Anyway, I continued on with doing, rather than going back to the magazine, was the Washingtonian magazine. I decided to keep on with these highly factual, highly researched, as if I were reporting, as I did for years and years, kinds of historical novels that are laced with, facts and issues of the time period, hopefully within a good story that entertains kids. So I had just finished up one novel and was in Boston right before that, just heartbreaking and horrible bombing that occurred at the Boston Marathon. And we immediately, if you think back, I think it was 2013 that happened. You think back, we were kind of in the midst of and then plunged even further into debate about how to protect Americans, national security versus individual rights of privacy, and right. Surveillance kind of thing. Yeah. A proactive, careful screening of people who are coming into the country versus racial profiling and, racial labeling. So I thought back to when, it was such a difficult conversation that was going on in the country at the time. And I know that often when you have fairly heated political conversations, that finding a time period that is similar in the topics being discussed or the issues being faced, the challenges to society, that going back in history a little is sometimes finding a parable for that. It really kind of takes the heat of immediacy out of the conversation while providing insight into the current events. Just like Arthur Miller did with The Crucible. So many people, it is ostensibly about the Salem witch trials, but what it really was about was the McCarthy Red Scare that was going on at the time that he wrote it. It was very much a parable for that time period. So I realized in thinking about how could I address these topics with teenagers who will become our next leaders and our next voters, and we want them to be thinking and analytical consumers of news, and participants in our democracy. That the McCarthy period really addressed all of those issues kind of in spades. The issue of, a legitimate fear and a legitimate danger, then are reacting to it with hysteria in such a way that we, delve in mob mentality and xenophobia and often political rhetoric that came out of McCarthy that is, hateful and stereotypical and inflammatory and fear-mongering. So it's a fairly complicated time politically, a lot of different issues, and I decided that the best way to write the novel was to actually pull out historical events and splatter them as primary documents, basically, as the things that the readers could look at themselves and analyze for each individual chapter. And wrote the chapters as self-contained months, starting from July 1953, when the Rosenbergs were executed for espionage and spying, supposedly, for the Soviets, and ending a year later in July 1954 with the Senate hearings with McCarthy versus the Army, where that kind of legendary attorney for the Army spoke those wonderful words, "Have you no sense of decency, sir?" which kind of broke the psychic hold on the nation that McCarthyism and the Red Scare and red baiting and fear of communism infiltration and subversive thoughts, the kind of stranglehold that had been on the United States during that time. So I took two boys. I decided to, while parsing out the factual, most pithy things that happened within each month and dropping them for my readers to see at the beginning of the chapters, and then the chapters often contain those events or news events, I decided that the best way to show the kind of effect on teenagers that all the national dialogue that was going on during that time was to have one boy, and in almost two equal protagonists, one on either side of the spectrum of the political argument during the Red Scare. So I have a son of an FBI agent who really is, the true believer in democracy and trying to make the world safe for democracy. He's a World War II veteran. And then the son of a diplomat who was very much a servant of the country, but as a diplomat and State Department employee was often kind of the target of speculation. And the son also of a Czechoslovakian artist with a pretty beatnik and progressive big sister. All the types of people who would have been considered suspect during that time in terms of their political leanings, their involvements in things like civil rights movements or pro-labor movements or art movements that might have seemed to somehow question the status quo. That's a long answer to your question.
Oh, it's beautiful. There's so much in that answer. I want to pick apart each and every piece of it.
Good. Okay.
So so you mentioned, of course, that it's very complex, and it is very complex. I mean,
yes.
That time and the time that we're in right now.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that makes it so complex, and what you mentioned, is that there are legitimate fears. There are legitimate concerns about safety involved in these things. And so, I don't know if someone like McCarthy set out to, in an innocent way to really try to protect America, or if he was just an opportunist. Can you speak on that a little bit? Like, it's interesting to me to try to figure out the character of someone like him and know whether or not his real base concerns were pure at heart. I mean, obviously he probably thought he was a good guy, but that's what makes it so difficult, I think, partly.
Yes, it is. I think he believed that he was making America safe again. I really do. I mean, I don't agree with his politics, but I think he was somebody. He served in World War II. He served in the Senate. I think he really, and there had been these legitimate threats, right before McCarthy kind of burst onto the national stage. There had been quite a trial of Alger Hiss in the State Department, for supposedly leaking documents and information to the communist Soviets. But Carl Fuchs, who I don't know if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, but who had been been a physicist on the Manhattan Project, had just confessed to passing on secrets. And then there had been the Rosenberg's trial. Well, that came afterward, I'm sorry. And then we were in the middle of the Korean War. And the Korean, North Korea is being being armed. It was being done by the Soviets. And we missed that intelligence because of a decoding apparatus that we had suddenly being rendered obsolete because of spies within that agency in the United States. So there were a lot of things that had happened that were dangerous and were unnerving. And of course, the predominant thing is, he splashes onto the stage only 5 years after the end of World War II. We've just seen the horror of an atomic bomb, and the Soviet Union has just gotten theirs. Yes. So, the tensions and the fears were huge during this time period, the Cold War. We just don't really think about it that much now but back then it was really frightening. So I think McCarthy believed that he was genuinely addressing a threat. Now, did he go to the extremes and become fanatical? This is the danger of fanaticism, right? And becoming a zealot. And because he saw no black and whites, he saw no grays. He saw only black and white. There's a quote from him at the beginning of the book that, let me find it, that there are no degrees of disloyalty. A man is either loyal or disloyal in the United States. That mean, right? So, that doesn't allow for a whole lot of gradation in terms of if you think, for instance, that labor unions should have, healthcare benefits, that wasn't the status quo at the time. So that could be seen as a subversive, potentially communistic mindset.
Right. And that's exactly what you bring it up in your blog, and I love the blog entry that compared the McCarthy era to what we're going through now, and that particular quote really does bring out the similarities there, the idea of loyalty, of blind loyalty. Yes. Oh my God, yeah, very powerful. Yes,
and very much to him. There was this kind of cult thing about him. And he was, see if you see the similarities, he was this Midwestern kind of bluff, backroom poker dealing, charismatic bad boy who, took on the coastal elites, called them eggheads, made fun of them, spoke in kind of blunt, I don't want to say simplistic, but blunt slogans, right? And made people, and he fed on a growing nativism because people had come home from the horrors of World War II. They wanted to stay home. They wanted to, focus on their own families and their own way of living. So it was this growing nativism. There was this growing fatigue with international politics and the East Coast elite, those FDR New Dealers that were still kind of, running the country, right? There was this huge discrediting of the media as being, biased. Didn't use the word fake, but,
right.
The kinds of similar, and then having these, I want to find them, this kind of catchy phrases of, McCarthy immediately coined these character assassination labels of pinko, dupes, Fifth Amendment communists, fellow travelers, or the, the threat of better dead than red, right? Yeah. And sort of goes along with lying Ted, crooked Hillary, bad hombres, criminal aliens, rapists, absolutely. Nasty, low IQ, lock her up. Yeah, send them back.
This happens the way it has. But but back to the book.
Thank you.
It's funny. Well, you mentioned, since the Muslim ban, there's been a fire hose of just travesties just spewing from, this current administration. And it's funny, when I was reading your book, so like you said, you have it separated out into chapters that go month by month. And at the beginning of each chapter, you have news clippings of what was happening in that month of that year. And as I was reading it, I was thinking, my God, every month of this year had something huge, some huge landmark thing happening.
Yes.
And I was thinking how crazy the time must have been. And then I realized, well, every month that we're living right now has the same kind of strange headlines that just pop. It's just really substantial all the time.
Yes, and I think that they probably had the same kind of issues that we do, sort of like every day there being something kind of startling or even cataclysmic in terms of, what the ripple effects would be from it.
Right. And just you want to hit pause and try to figure out the implications of every little thing, but
yes.
it just keeps coming.
Yes,
Although,
actually, I hope one of the things that this book will help, and it's again, tipping my cap in thanks to educators and librarians who are trying so hard to create something they call media literacy right now, right. Which is to get kids to, with all their tweets, all their Facebook, all the memes, all the stuff that comes just bombards them all the time, finding fact within, what are the legitimate sites that are going to give you hopefully a comprehensive and balanced account of what actually happened that day, right. Without spin, without without spin or without just trying to, or propaganda is the word in McCarthy's time, I would definitely be thinking propaganda. But anyway, the idea that students really so much need to be able to figure out what they believe based on, because that's democracy. I always say to kids when I see them, and I hand out green feathers when I'm at schools, which we can talk about in a minute, why I do that. But I always say, I don't care which side of the spectrum you're on. I just want you to be a participating member of this democracy, because that is what is required of us. And right. to have a comprehensive debate, right? And there's this great quote from Edward R. Murrow, who kind of became my hero, is that we must remember that in America, dissent is not disloyalty. We were based on dissent, and discussion of disagreeing ideas and finding the compromise that works for all of us. E plurimis unum, right? So, and I'm sorry for and now I've lost what you originally asked me.
Let me just jump in here for a second and just want to remind the audience that we're not actually talking about a civics textbook or a history book. We're talking about a novel.
Thank you.
And it's actually quite an entertaining and engrossing and suspenseful novel. With some very, very vividly drawn characters. Maybe we could talk a little bit about the story of your book.
That's a good idea, yeah.
Thank you. You saved me from getting on this political track here. Thank you so much. I had such fun writing this novel. Because I very much was thinking Holden Caulfield in some ways, that wonderful peevish boy voice, right? Of the teenager trying to find his way. So, it was such fun to write because they are two extremes in terms of one being from a quote unquote conservative or a more traditional, I should say, forget the traditional family, in the United States, and another one being, very international and very kind of cosmopolitan in their thinking. Richard is very much a reader who has been, he jokes about, the crumb bums that he knows at school and the girls who won't talk to a guy who, that they'll date the guys with duck butt hairdos and won't talk to a guy who talks about Sam Spade, right? So that was kind of fun to have that banter. His friend, Vladimir, was, he is the coolest of cool, right? He is a jazz saxophonist, reads everything, has been to New York, lived in London. He immediately has a copy of Casino Royale that Richard doesn't have yet. And the suspense comes from as their friendship grows, there are things that Richard, the FBI son, sees within Vladimir's home that is progressive, that is artistic, that is, they read books and such that would be banned in the local library, that Richard begins to misinterpret and to begin to be suspicious about. And because of his dad is an FBI agent, he really wants to be a G-man. He really wants to get the bad guys, right? These guys are his heroes. He begins dealing in rumor and innuendo by the little things that he's found in the house that at the time looks like maybe the mother has been involved in some espionage, but there's a whole different element to it. And the sisters are great foils. I think there's a younger sister named Ginny who wants to be, and she is an aspiring camera girl. She wants to be a reporter. This is back in 1953. She wants to be just like Jackie Kennedy was before Jackie Kennedy married. And so there's a near drowning. There's spy stuff. And then, and a shooting. I kind of stumbled on that event that I didn't know had happened. So they are in the middle of one of the first shootings that occurs on Capitol Hill. Yep.
Capitol Hill, yeah.
And I hope there is a lot of suspense, and I hope a lot of humor too. There are a lot of just dumb bunnies that kids will recognize, like the alpha girl who uses one to try to date the other, and
right.
It was great fun.
It really is. It's a great little story, and it's we got heavy-handed very quickly in our discussion.
Yes.
but I just want to remind our readers that it is a novel. It's fiction. Although it is entrenched in real time and in a real, a real era.
A historical novel.
Right.
Yes.
And so it's a lot of fun to read. It's not a thick, dense, historical account of these things. It's actually, like you said, there's some humor and there's some adventure and excitement, and it's really fun to read. So that kind of brings me to my next question. What you started out more a journalist. How was the transition into fiction writing?
It wasn't that hard, because actually I will add to what you just so kindly said. The thing about good historical fiction is that kids will learn stuff without knowing that they're learning it. They're just reading a good story, right? It's magic. It's like osmosis, right? They're just all the little wonderful revealing details that you stick in there, like what they drink or what they're eating or what their clothes look like, which were ridiculous at the time, by the way. Those are all things that kind of give them the context, but they're just worried about the characters and the story. So I actually found, I think because as a magazine journalist, I was doing what is now called, I'm old now, I laugh about hearing it called creative nonfiction, that there are MFAs in this now, which is wonderful because what they're doing is teaching the techniques that a lot of us were using for years and years without it being, called anything specific. That was really, honest to God, started by Truman Capote with In Cold Blood, where he, that is that kind of nonfiction narrative that's told with fiction technique. In other words, you tell a story with scene and anticipation, and you don't always explain to readers what they're seeing. They need to think of it themselves. It's a wonderful narrative of all these facts that he collected. And I used to do a lot of narratives where I would follow a subject for a month, say, and write a lot of scenes of what I witnessed. I, for instance, wrote about the first woman to receive a bone marrow transplant to treat breast cancer at a hospital here in D.C. So it tells you, it goes back a ways, but I was there for the marrow harvesting. She was kind enough to invite me into her life to let me witness that so I could really describe it. So I had done that kind of writing for a long time. So the segue into writing highly researched historical fiction was relatively easy. I actually plunged straight from Suspect Red to my wonderful editor at HarperCollins telling me to do something about Hamilton. Anything
really?
about Hamilton, yes. And so I got that assignment. I literally just sent back the final galley on Suspect Red, and I started researching and writing that novel about Peggy Schuyler, the youngest of the Schuyler sisters. It's a biographical novel, is the term that we're now kind of using, which I'm really grateful for in this case. Did that in 10 months because because if I am anything, I'm a good reporter. I did it for long enough. I feel privileged and love the hunt of the research. That's where you get all the really great, I always tell kids when I talk to them at schools and they think I'm crazy, but the fun stuff is the research. It really is, because you learn all these details. And like with Richard and Vladimir, there were so many little things that I could drop in there that came specifically from the research that just kind of told me things to write, like, for instance, that shooting, or the fact, it's a fact that Hoover and LBJ lived on the same street, just sort of catty-corner to one another, which is just such a tremendous irony to me. But that told me to include little details about LBJ and that kind of thing in there. And I'm trying to think about other little details. Some of the stuff about Hoover, which is a whole nother conversation for us to have. But,
right. Well,
that he...
Before we get too far, I do want to bring up, we're running a little long here, but I want to make sure that I talk to you about the fact that, and this was very interesting to me in the book, so I'd hate to miss it, the role of art in what you've written here. It's interesting that the mother of the family who's being spied on is an artist, and one of the things that they find interesting and find suspicious about her is that she's friends with other artists, and there's an art exhibit that is being investigated. And it's interesting to me, partly I guess because I'm an artist, that the government, or that that people find art to be so powerful and such a good way to spread ideas.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. The State Department, and they've done this quite a lot actually over the years. They'd use jazz, for instance, to kind of, get communist countries people there to embrace music, right? And the kind of free nature and individualistic voices allowed in our society. So there was this art exhibit that they had actually collected of modern art artists who tended to use bold primary colors and be a little bit more abstract in their presentation, or very emotive, meaning really focusing on the emotions of the subjects of workers, for instance, right? And what their life was like in America, much like... oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Steinbeck, who I so love, who was banned.
Right.
Oh, and let me just go into, what opens the book, if I may, because again, it is quite powerful. And if we really want to spread ideas, we often do it through art, right? And music and literature and dance. I opened the book, talk about something that I just stumbled on during my reporting, the fact that Robin Hood was banned, right? Robin Hood was banned because of the fear of the power of that story, that it had this subversive undertone of Robin Hood and his merry men taking from the rich and giving to the poor. That was a communist philosophy, right? So there was this, there was a textbook commissioner in Indiana who banned it, and in fear because of all the guilt by association and pressures from community groups against people who were deemed being subversive, and these loyalty review boards. I mean, we haven't even gotten into all of that. Not enough time. Immediately librarians began pulling Robin Hood from the shelf. Now, the great thing about this, and this is the power of young people and art, as you ask, there was the Green Feather movement. There were 5 college students in Indiana who the banning of Robin Hood was like, that was the final straw for them. that was where we had gone from, to the total ridiculous, that we were going to be banning Robin Hood. So they went out to local farms and collected huge burlap bags full of chicken feathers, took them back to their dorm rooms, dyed them green, and started passing them out like the Merry Men feathers in protest, this wonderful symbol, this kind of lovely little artistic symbol of, freedom of the press, right? And freedom of speech, and how banned book and censorship can be so ridiculous, right? And there's a wonderful quote actually from Eisenhower saying that the best way you can, quote unquote, in essence, know your enemy is to read what they write. You won't be turned by it. You will be enlightened by it. You will be able to see the world for what it is, right?
Sure.
So anyway, that's why I hand out my green feathers. And the green feather movement, just by the by, those 5 kids were vilified by local press, called, commies and fellow travelers and pinkos and subversives and radical long hairs. And they weren't. They're pretty conservative kids. But the Merry Men movement and the Green Feather movement started spreading to colleges across the United States. And they were actually Merry Men marches, which I have Natalia mention that she's going to be in one at the end of the book. And it really goes to this power of, of literature and story and art and ideas. They're dangerous.
Absolutely. Yeah. One of my favorite quotes is from an art historian, John Ruskin, who says, "The story of man is written in 3 books: his words, his deeds, and his art. And of the 3, the only one you can trust is art." I love that quote.
Yeah, it's a beautiful quote, and it's because art makes sense of it. It puts context to it, and it puts our hope to things. Right?
Very inspiring.
I mean, it's one of the most wondrous things about human beings is our desire for hope. And actually, speaking of Steinbeck, who was banned constantly and then ends up winning the Pulitzer, but they were burning copies of his Grapes of Wrath. He says that a writer always has to believe in the possibilities of man, the perfectibility. I'm sorry, that a good writer always believes in the perfectibility of man.
I love it. Well, this has been a fantastic discussion about the book Suspect Red by Laura Elliott. Go pick it up. This brings us to our speed round here. Right. So we have a battery of questions that we give to every one of our guests, and here it goes. Are you ready for our speed round?
I'm ready.
Okay, here we go.
Hurry.
When was the first time you remember falling in love with a book?
Oh gosh, I think I was 4 or 5 years old when I discovered the Beatrix Potter books, all of them on my shelf at home.
Peter Cottontail.
Yes.
Fantastic. Has a book ever changed your mind?
Oh God, I should have, about
anything.
Yes, and and here I'm going to completely not be able to give you an answer as to which one, but I read to learn and to change always. So a book always opens such vistas for me that I know it will change me in many ways.
Fantastic. Has a book ever changed your life?
I think writing one book changed my life. Yes. That first book I mentioned to you, called It's Under a War-Torn Sky, it completely changed. I will tell you all, those of you who want to be writers and might be struggling a little bit with it, I didn't write my first novel until I was in my late 40s. So Under a War-Torn Sky changed my life.
That is fantastic. I love, that's a great thing, a great way to answer, I think, is to mention actually writing a book changing your life. That's good. Okay, great. Okay. Has a book ever made you cry?
Oh, all the time. Oh my God. All the time. Yes. I tell you, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just said good. I think that's great.
Oh, I'm always crying. I'm such a sap. In fact, my kids, I do a lot of reading of other books too before I write my books often. And and my kids have laughed. I have to tell you, there are many World War II novels, for instance, that I'll hear them close. They used to close the door in my office and say, because I would have my head down on my desk weeping over whatever it was I just read. And they would close the door and say, Mom's researching again. Don't bother her.
A dark time.
It's good for you. I think it's very good for you.
Yes, and I will also just tell you that both my kids have become creative artists themselves. One's a screenwriter and one's a theater director. So anyway,
wow, fantastic.
Yeah, I'm very proud of them.
So, let's see, name a book that you have read more than once.
The one that I've just read again is Codename Verity. I think I've read it 4 or 5 times. Do you know it? It's by Elizabeth Vine, and it is this staggeringly potent and wonderful and amazing account of 2 women who are, I don't want to give it away because the twist at the end is so surprising, a pilot in World War II.
Can you repeat the title, please?
Codename Verite.
Oh, okay.
Nice.
It's an amazing read. I probably have read it 5 times in the last, 8 years.
Powerful endorsement. We'll check that one out. And here we come to our final and most controversial question of the battery.
Are you now, or have you ever been?
Yeah. I'm just going to take the 5th there. Thank you.
No, actually, it's do you have any poetry committed to memory?
Yes, actually. One thing that is my mantra is hope is a thing with feathers that perches on the soul and never asks.
Emily Dickinson.
I think that might be the second time we've the second guest who is.
Yes, that's right. We had another guest who also mentioned that great poem.
No,
wonderful.
It's kind of my daily mantra.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a really, really fun conversation.
It has been my great pleasure, and thank you so much for attacking all aspects of this book, and I really appreciate it. And congratulations on both your books. I will be getting them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, this has been a conversation with Laura Elliott about her book Suspect Red. What is next? You said there's a book on Hamilton. We also mentioned a book on Berlin.
Yes, the book on Hamilton is out. It's called Hamilton and Peggy, A Revolutionary Friendship. And I have to tell you, Peggy Schuyler was astounding. She was fluent in French. She rushed into the fray of an attempted kidnapping of her father to save her baby sister. She's just badass. Wow. So there's that one. And the one that I'm working on now is actually kind of spawned to be a companion to Suspect Red. The working title is Walls, and it's about the Berlin Wall. And it's same two boys, on one an East German and one an American Army brat, and what happens when the wall actually goes up.
Beautiful.
Overnight. And actually, just so y'all know, if they're looking for me, they need to look for L.M. Elliott.
Yes,
rather than Laura. Although hopefully there would be cross-referencing of me and computers. So anyway, thank you all so very much.
So you do have a website. So tell our readers where to go.
Yes, and there's a lot of stuff about McCarthyism and Suspect Red on that. It's LM Elliott, so LMELLIOTT.com.
Fantastic.
2 L's, 2 T's.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
And while you're on your computer, you can go to POV-Publishing.com, where you can listen to our past podcasts. You can read comics by world-class artists. You can read poetry and essays. And you can follow the links to find my book, Why So Much, by Lance Myers, and LB's book, The Goddamn Fool.
The Goddamn Fool.
So thanks a lot for tuning in. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.